Let's get to the case of Larry Nassar. He sexually assaulted 150 girls, and at his sentencing, the judge in the case, the federal judge, really did not hold back. And the question is whether or not Judge Rosemarie Aquilina, I know I said that wrong, but forgive me, whether or not she went too far. And the underlying conversation is clearly the conversation that I want to have of where's the threshold? At what point do we have to be so civil to the point where we can't be petty? Honestly, that's what it is. Like if I dispense with all the pretense and trying to make this sound like it's an intellectual, philosophical conversation, to an extent it is, but to another extent, you gotta. I personally have no problem embracing my inner pettiness, especially when it's about an issue so serious, about crimes as serious. So federal judge Aquilina said a couple of things, and I want to read some of her quotes and get your opinion as well as give mine as to whether or not she went too far. Let's see. Let's start with the most egregious. Let's start with the most egregious, the one about the Constitution, whether if it were not for the Constitution prohibiting cruel and unusual punishment. I want to read the exact statement, and here's what she said. Our Constitution does not allow for cruel and unusual punishment. If it did, I have to say, I might allow what he did to all of these beautiful souls, these young women in their childhood. I would allow someone or many people to do to him what he did to others. And this seems to be the statement that has sent a lot of people into the category of she went too far. A lot of people have described it, and when I say a lot of people, of course, these conversations happen on Twitter, and that's a significant place because this is where you can hear the voices of media figures, people who have large enough platforms to where what they say is significant. Take Matt Iglesias of Vox.com. He's in the category, tweeting earlier yesterday that essentially that her grandstanding was too much. As much as he despised the person of Larry Nassar, he feels that the judge went too far. And so there are quite a few people who are falling into that category. I'm of the opposite opinion. I think it was just right. I think that she voiced the concerns, the anger of so many families and real victims who suffered at the hands of this man for years, whose lives are forever changed. And okay. Before I even go, I'm trying to pace myself because I definitely have a bias in this, right? I definitely have an opinion in this that is not above the fray. It's not the high road, right? And I'm okay with that. And I think that sometimes that we fight so hard to be the better people that we become what Brandon Sutton of the Discourse said, that we become recklessly civil, right? It's reckless civility. And in this case, I mean, it is jaw-dropping to hear a judge say things like, if it wasn't for the Constitution, I would do this to you. If it wasn't for the Constitution, I would essentially let a bunch of people rape you. And then she went on to say that, we can't give you the death penalty in here, but I'm essentially signing your death warrant. He got 40 to 175 years in this case. I mean, she was going, and she became, in that moment, the voice of so many people. And I think the question is this, is that at the point of sentencing, and this is probably a legitimate, this is a legal question, right? This is probably a constitutional question, a legal question, but I'm going to pose it here in this just conversation that we're having. Is there a difference in the responsibility for the judge in sentencing, in their statements at sentencing, versus their responsibility during the trial? Now, granted, there was no trial here because he pled guilty. Right? But the judge did allow, I believe, some 145 statements to be read in this hearing. And so, but does the responsibility of the judge differ? And I'm sure that there's some legal scholars or some attorneys or some judges in the audience who will very quickly have the answer to that. I don't have the answer to that. In fact, I didn't pose the question until 5 seconds ago. It didn't drop into my head until 5 seconds ago. And again, let me get this off screen because they definitely do not sponsor us. Because if it is, then if there is a difference, then there seems to be, oftentimes, I've seen judges serve in the role of the voice of the victims at sentencing. And I've seen this many, many, many occasions. And if this judge, this federal judge in this case, who is serving in this capacity, serving in the role of the voice of the victim in issuing out justice, the trial has been finished, the evidence has been presented, she presided over a fair trial, which is not the case in this because it was a guilty plea. But let's just put it into context. If her role, if a judge's role is different in sentencing than it is during the trial, then this makes absolute sense. It makes absolute sense for a judge to become the voice of the victim because I think that they actually, in many occasions, do that and have done that. And from that perspective, then I would say concretely that I see nothing wrong with what she said, because if she's speaking on behalf of the voice of the victims, right, in this sentencing, because the trial phase is over and she's served as a fair adjudicator in this matter, then I see nothing wrong. I will say that someone tweeted me this morning, and I think they made a wonderful point that I will agree with, and actually I will try to find that tweet so I don't just have to paraphrase, because I think this would be the only place that I would give a criticism. And this is from Esteban Hayes on Twitter this morning. They said, I also wouldn't say she was grandstanding. I would not say that she was grandstanding. I will say that the judge was unwise in that moment. And I think that's the perfect way to describe this, because, I mean, I only gave you 2 statements out of, I don't know, a 15-minute statement of what she said. And a lot of it was just as intense as these other statements. These 2 statements that I gave you, though, were like the apex. They were the crown jewel of her statement. And, you know, I would say that in this case, it is unwise in any case to give ammunition to your opponents, or in this case, I think more specifically, to undermine to potentially, even remotely undermine the potential of actually getting justice in a particular case. I would say that that is unwise. However, it's not incumbent upon us to be the biggest person all the time. And I think that's the crux of what I want to say this morning. It's not, I'm tired. I'm personally tired of being the bigger person, right? We don't always have to be the more magnanimous. We're not living in a civil time, right? We're not living in a time, and of course, I'm mixing stories, I'm mixing issues, I'm speaking more politically now than I am about the specific case, but for me, it's the same thing. For me, it's the same thing. At some point, people have the right to just let how they feel out. And if you don't like it, if you think it's unwise, that's fine. If you disagree with it, that's fine. But it doesn't make how they feel any less relevant or significant. And so many of us have to bottle up what we're feeling. We have to pick every word to be precise. We have to be extremely fastidious with our word choice. We have to make sure that we dot every I and cross every T. We have to make sure that we never raise our voice above a certain level. We have to compartmentalize every aspect of our anger and our emotions. And I'm just done doing that. And it's unhealthy to do that. And I don't think that we live in a society where always trying to be the bigger person is useful, period. I can end the statement there. It is not useful to always try to be the more magnanimous person. And in my saying that, I recognize that it is not a magnanimous statement to say, right? But sometimes, I mean, for the love of God, sometimes people have the right and the need, and the moment calls for you to not try to take the high road. I hear Michelle Obama in my ear saying, when they go low, we go high. And I'm personally, if you watch me for any significant amount of time, you realize that as high of a road as I try to take 9 times out of 10, I will try to take that high road. But there's going to be that 1 out of 10 occasion. And these days, it's really like 2 out of 10. 20% of the time, I'm going to cut as low, if not lower, as our opponent, because the times don't call for us to always be civil. And I know this is not apples to apples. The judge has a different responsibility, and I would, and because the question that I pose, I think is the only relevant question in terms of substance, the question of whether or not this judge has a responsibility different in sentencing and in her statement at sentencing than she did during the trial. I will pursue that question. I didn't get that question in my head until we started the show. I will pursue the answer to that question from a legal standpoint, and I will talk to people about that and bring that back to you, right? So I know what I'm saying is not apples to apples, but I am taking this to, I'm extrapolating from this to make a point about life, to make a point about politics, to make a point about our culture right now, to make a point about black issues, about race issues, about political issues, about economic issues. We don't have the responsibility of always being the good and the bigger person. We don't. And then sometimes when we try to always be that more magnanimous person, we become a useful tool for people who know how to capitalize and monopolize on our desire to be the bigger person. And we become our own worst enemy by trying to always take the high road. If I were to make a cultural comparison, it would be from Star Wars. Oh, imagine that. It would be from Star Wars. I actually didn't plan this whatsoever. For people listening to the podcast, I just revealed my Star Wars shirt underneath the sweater. It would be Star Wars, and I'm not the biggest Star Wars fan. I'm a huge Star Wars fan, but I don't know everyone's name. So as I filibuster, I'm going to look up the name of this particular Jedi, and I think that his case, Samuel Jackson. Jedi name. So in this case, it is Mace Windu. I knew I could find it. So Mace Windu was the Jedi master who was closest to utilizing the dark side without ever going into the dark side. And there is a threshold. This is cultural. I mean, this is just, you know, I'm just trying to give you a comparison, right? It's relevant in the sense that sometimes you have to tread in the dark arts. Sometimes you have to go to look to the edge of the abyss, right? You have to go to the edge of the abyss and realize that there are things in there that you're going to have to use to fight back against the monsters that surround you. And then hopefully that abyss doesn't consume you. Generally it does. And I mean, so be it. But sometimes some people are going to have to fight the dirty fights, right? You're going to have to fight the dirty fights. Everybody is not up for it. Everybody's not willing to do it. But I mean, look at where we are right now in society. Look at who the president of the United States is. Do you honestly believe that we're going to be able to win and beat Donald Trump in 2020 if we get a candidate that's just kind, a candidate that is magnanimous, a candidate who is above the fray, a candidate who is incapable of mixing it up with Donald Trump in the dark arts, in the dark side? Do you think that the society actually would benefit from someone who is more concerned with being civil than they are fighting Donald Trump right where he is? And I'm telling you, and this is a far extrapolation from the original story, but the underlying current is the same. The underlying message is the truth, with the exception of whether or not that judge has a responsibility in sentencing, that she may have violated the responsibility in sentencing. However, if the judge has the liberty to speak for the voice of the victims in sentencing, then I see absolutely no problem with what she did. I feel it is a long extrapolation from that point, but the undercurrent is the same. And it is simply this. We're not at a time in society where we can be civil all of the time. Very simply put.